Sova has dominated the initiator meta for quite some time, but after the recent nerf and addition of Fade into the game, there is a lot of uncertainty on which initiators are the best on each given map. In this video, we'll break down each initiator for every map in Valorant and place the respective agent into one of three categories. Optimal, meaning it's the best pick on that particular map. Viable, meaning it might not be the best pick, but it can certainly work out if you're specialized in that agent. And not viable, meaning if you pick that agent, it's not going to work out well for your team. We'll start things off on Ascent with the optimal category. Double initiator has been the meta on this map for quite some time now, and personally, after the changes to Sova and bringing Fade into the game, not much changes in that regard. As we've seen throughout many matches in pro play, Sova and KO are the optimal picks for this map. Sova's dart and drone combo can clear off so many operator angles on the attack side of things, and KO's flashes can be used so well to assist your team. Not only that, but we all know the power of KO's knife and ultimate ability when you want to hit a site fast. As we move over to the viable category, this is where Fade falls in. Now, while I think Fade's abilities are really good on their own, there's one major reason as to why I think Sova is better than Fade on this particular map, and that's because of how strong Sova's drone is. Sova's drone is able to push off operators so much better than Fade's Prowler is. And while you could definitely argue that Fade's Haunt ability is better than Sova's Recon, especially if you have lineups that land on top of the rooftops, the value of the drone is just so unmatched in this situation. Also falling into the viable category is Skye. Now, as I mentioned earlier, double initiator has always been super common on Ascent. But before KO became meta, Skye was in KO's place. And while I still think there is some use for Skye on this map, KO just overwhelms her in every way possible. Last but not least, we have Breach falling into the not viable category, and I will say I do think Breach is very underrated in Valorant. However, I just don't think his abilities are best suited for this map. One thing that I really appreciate about the initiator class is that the effectiveness of each agent is very much determined by the style of the map. For example, Sova's not good on every single map in the game, and as we talked about with Breach on Ascent, while he isn't good on that particular map, there are other maps where he is super useful. With that being said though, let's get into Bind. For the optimal category, we have both Skye and Sova. Now, unlike Ascent, Bind isn't necessarily a double initiator map. While I think both Skye and Sova can work really well together, it's also very common to use one initiator here, such as Skye, and then double up on the controller role. So take the fact that there are two agents here in the optimal role with a grain of salt. Skye is so good on this map because of her ability to retain map control. Pop flashing outside of hookah or long can keep the enemy outside of those choke points, thus making your job on the defensive side of Bind so much easier. As far as Sova goes, we all know what makes Sova so good: the recon dart, the drone to push off operator angles, and of course his overall ability to relay information to the rest of your team. As we move over to the viable category, again, I have Fade here for the same exact reason as I mentioned on Ascent. She doesn't have that drone that Sova has to push off operator angles, but she still can be very useful if you have these rooftop lineups, especially on a map like Bind where these lineups are everywhere. Putting Fade in the viable category will be a common theme throughout the rest of this video, but it will be really interesting to see how this changes as pro teams are allowed to compete with her. Also in the viable category, we have Breach, who's super good at retaining map control on Bind. Not only that, but I find that Breach flashes can provide a lot of value on this map because of how many different close corners there are. Being able to flash directly through those walls can really set up your team. Breach's Aftershock is super useful here as well, especially when you're defending and trying to stop a plant through the truck on the front of a site. The only agent that falls into the not viable category for Bind is KO, who had a 0% pick rate on this map during Masters 1 Reykjavik in 2022. While KO's knife and ultimate are arguably good on every single map, it's really difficult to find use out of his flash here, and that's why teams tend to lead more toward the Skye, where you have ultimate control over the flash. As we move to our third map, Breeze, the optimal category is going to be filled with the same two agents that we saw on Ascent. Both Sova and KO have become staples in the pro scene, as well as the double initiator meta on this map. By the way, if you haven't seen my KO guide, I created a full video on how pro players play KO. I'm going to have that linked in the card in the upper right hand corner of your screen. Both of these agents are dominant on this map for the same reasons that I mentioned before. As we move over to the viable category, Skye finds herself in a very similar position here as she did on Ascent. Before KO was introduced to the game, it was very common to see both Sova and Skye, but nowadays she's just being overwhelmed by KO's utility. Now, I also have Breach here, but we're going to put this in asterisk because I've seen a lot of theories from different respected Valorant creators on why Breach could be potentially useful on this map. When you think about a B site execution, the power that Breach has to stun the entire left side of B site is super useful in theory. And obviously there are a lot of structures such as the pyramids in the middle of A site where flashing entirely through them could be really useful. So I agree with a lot of the different Valorant creators that say Breach has a lot of potential on this map, despite the fact that we haven't seen him at all yet in pro play. Last but not least, We have Fade in the not viable category, and the major reason here is because there aren't quite enough rooftops for Fade's lineups to come into effect any more than Sova's recon dart would. If you guys are enjoying the video, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss one of the weekly videos that I post on this channel. I also stream Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time over on the Purple streaming platform, so make sure you guys come say what's up. We have a really great community over there. With that being said, let's jump back into the video. As we move over to Fracture, this is where the initiator meta gets shaken up a little bit. As a lot of you are probably aware, this is Breach's playground, and in Masters 1 Reykjavik, Breach had a 94% pick rate on this map throughout the entire tournament, where only one team didn't play him. What makes Breach so good on this map is his stun ability. Using this one piece of utility can help the team retain or take map control with little to no counter at the various choke points. And for that reason, Breach finds himself alone in the optimal category for Fracture. As we move into the viable category, we have both KO and Fade. As we've talked about earlier, I think a majority of KO's utility is super useful on a majority of maps. Obviously, his knife and ult are always useful. His Molly is really good on Fracture to stop rushes in these very tight choke points, and there are some pretty decent flash lineups that you can learn to set up your team. As we move into the not viable category, we have both Skye and Sova. And while I think there's an argument that you could find value out of both the dog and the drone on any map in the game, I think it's way too easy to have a teammate bait and break one of those pieces of utility to set up another player that's using an operator to follow up that angle once that piece of utility is broken. So for those reasons alone, in addition to the many lineups that you would need to justify playing Sova on this map, both of these agents are not viable. As we move over to Haven, this is arguably the map where initiators shine the most in all of Valorant. In the optimal category, we have 3 agents. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that you rock a triple initiator comp. It's very common to see double initiator on this map, but the reason that all 3 of these agents fall into this optimal category is because throughout pro play, it was super common for teams to pick 2 out of these 3 agents, and they were rocked every single time. These 3 agents are Sova, Breach, and Skye. Referencing back to my latest YouTube video about map control, I made a whole segment in that video on retaining map control on Haven and how pro teams used it with Breach. And that's what Breach is best for, using your utility to set up your teammates and retain certain parts of the map. Skye is very useful here as well. She actually had the highest pick rate of any of the initiators on this map at 78%. And of course, we have Sova, who at this point is really a staple in all of Valorant because of his ability to get so much information with his recon and drone. In the viable category, we have KO, who plenty of pro teams rocked on this map as well, but in my opinion, he doesn't provide the same value that the other 3 initiators do because of how predictable his flash lineups can be on this map. Now, of course, it's very unlikely that you're going to find predictable flashes in a ranked game, but I'm more basing this off of pro play. The teams that used KO on this map did the same flash lineups over and over, and after a certain point, it was becoming very predictable for the other team to play anti-flash. For the not viable category, we have Fade, and I just don't think she provides anywhere near as much value as the other agents do between the flashes and then Sova's drone and recon lineup. As we move over to Icebox, this is Sova's playground, and Sova is the sole agent that falls into the optimal category here. Sova's dart and drone are so good at taking map control, especially as you move up toward B long and scale up on A site. As we take a look at the viable category, the most viable agent is definitely KO. And what makes KO so good, and his pick rate slowly increasing as pro play moves on, is that he's quite literally an anti-Sova for this map. If you hear the Sova droning in the back of A main, you throw your knife, that cancels out his drone, and that's what makes him so useful here. I've also seen some pretty insane use from Fade on this map in the short time that she's been released in this game, and I'm really looking forward to seeing more pro play with Fade on this map, as there are some really nifty places to throw her haunt ability. In the not viable category, we have both Breach and Skye, and the reason these agents don't do so well on this map is because there are so many angles that you have to clear when you go into sight. This means that using a drone to clear those many angles is going to be so much more useful than using a Breach stun that can only clear one angle. Not only that, but there are so many layers to each site, so if you flash the very first layer to go to the back of 410, sure, it might blind somebody that's sitting there on the headshot angle, but it's not going to have any effect on the other players that are sitting on the back of site. As we move over to our final map in Split, this is a really interesting map for initiators because there was a time where rocking no initiators on this map was very common. As Valorant has developed though, the initiator meta has become more and more strong, and it's definitely more common to see initiators on this map nowadays than it was a year ago. With that being said, I don't think there's one optimal agent on this map, but I do think there are a handful of agents that are super viable depending on your team's playstyle. So in the viable category, we have Skye, Breach, and KO. Sky's dog can be very, very useful for getting information on where the enemies are playing, and using her flash on the defensive side of things really early in the round can get info on where the enemy team is heading because her flash says blinded when you connect on it. Breach, on the other hand, is super useful for taking certain parts of the map when combined with raised satchels or a jet dash. When you're attacking, for example, and you're able to take control of mid, using one single breach stun can disrupt anything that the defensive team has going on through B heaven. The same exact thing can be said for A heaven and A site as well. KO is the third initiator to fall in the viable category on split, and KO is really, really good in my opinion, as there are very commonly 2 sentinels played on this map. If you're able to use a KO knife and suppress a sentinel while you're attacking, that can make entering onto a site so much easier than if you didn't have a KO in the first place. And for that reason alone, KO falls into the viable category. Fade and Sova both fall into the not viable category here, and the biggest reason for this is because of how many tight corners there are in this map. Even if you have the craziest lineups for both Fade and Sova, there's a good chance that this is only going to clear 1 or 2 angles, which, as we mentioned earlier, can be flushed out with one piece of utility like a breach stun. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of my picks down in the comments below. Do you agree, disagree, or remember to keep it respectful? And with that being said, I look forward to seeing you guys next time. Peace.